at a palliative care center at a major oncology hospital in the state of Kansas. Room 214 sat at the end of the hallway in the palliative care unit, where the light always seemed to dim as if the day had never truly begun, and time didn't pass. It stalled, dragging itself forward like a shadow with nowhere to go. The steady beeping of the heart monitor quietly marked each second of life that remained. The air was tinged with the scent of antiseptic, laced faintly with the stale trace of old blood. It was already evening, yet the light outside barely reached into the small room, where Caleb, 47 years old, lay facing the wall, having just vomited a dark red streak of blood onto the pristine white bedsheet. Dr. Evelyn pushed the door open and stepped inside. Her white coat was no longer crisp like it had been that morning. A few strands of hair had come loose, and the dark circles under her eyes revealed a long day, yet her gaze remained sharp, alert, and quietly cautious, the kind of watchfulness every resident learned after months in this ward. She set down the clipboard and quietly approached the bedside. Caleb didn't turn around. His breathing was labored, and his eyes stared blankly at the faded wall, where there was nothing but a single crack stretching from ceiling to floor, like a thread of fate slowly counting down. "Mr. Caleb?" Evelyn spoke gently, her tone neither too soft nor too cold. "I'm Dr. Evelyn. I came to check on your condition after the recent bleeding episode, the nurse reported." "No need to check anything," he cut her off, his voice hoarse with pain. "Just tell me, when my body's going to finally give out, when I'll die. I don't want hope. I don't want morphine. I don't want a psychologist. And I don't have family. Don't bother." Evelyn paused for a moment. She had met hundreds of patients, heard hundreds of versions of refusal, but the despair in his voice didn't come from a fear of dying. It came from somewhere else, deeper, darker. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she quietly stepped to the bedside, checked the drainage tube, listened to his heartbeat and breathing, and recorded the vitals. She didn't argue with him, didn't offer any of the "we're here to help" lines she'd once memorized from textbooks. She simply stayed silent. In this place, silence was the only medicine that wasn't rejected. As she turned to pick up her clipboard and leave, her eyes paused beneath the faded pillow. A small notebook lay there, its spine worn, the corners creased as if it had been picked up and put down countless times. A slip of white paper peeked out, an unfinished letter, handwritten, covered in scribbles and crossed-out lines, the ink bleeding across the page. She didn't touch it. But when he turned to face her and saw where her eyes had landed, he quickly pulled the pillow back and shoved it underneath, hiding it like a child concealing something forbidden. "It's none of your business," he snapped, his eyes flashing with anger, but beneath it, there was something that looked like shame. Evelyn nodded slowly. "I know." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her in her tracks. "What do you think I am? A terrible man? A coward who ran from responsibility?" Evelyn turned back. Her gaze was no longer that of a doctor, but of someone who had just collided with a memory of her own. She said, "I don't think anything. It's just that sometimes people don't need to explain what they've missed. They just need a reason gentle enough to let them go." Caleb let out a laugh, which quickly collapsed into a violent coughing fit, bringing up blood in the phlegm and turning the laughter into a strangled gasp. He spoke, voice raw. "I used to think, what if I wrote to her? What if I said I was sorry? What if I told her I was wrong? But then I realized she'd never read it. They've grown up now, raised to forget me. That's fine. I deserve that." Evelyn remained silent. That sentence sliced through the emotional armor she had carefully built over the years. She thought of her mother, a frail woman who, every evening, still set aside a portion of dinner on the table, even though her father had left when she was 6. A woman who never stopped hoping, never once voiced blame, even though that waiting ate away at her day by day. And Evelyn, the angry child she once was, had despised that weakness. She had sworn never to forgive that man and never to place her hope in anyone again. Yet here she was now, standing before another man, wearing the same expression of too late regret, clutching a letter that would likely never be sent. She whispered, Do you know that sometimes a letter needs to be sent to save a soul? Caleb closed his eyes. He didn't respond, but she saw his hand, the hand of a former soldier, rough and calloused, gripping the corner of the pillow tightly, as if letting go would cause everything left inside him to disappear. Evelyn stepped out of the room, but just before the door closed behind her, she turned back for one last glance. His silhouette lay still against the wall, alone, silent, and for the first time that day, her eyes filled with tears. The November sunlight slanted through the dusty frosted glass, casting pale, patchy streaks on the wall of the hospital room. That morning, the cold wind swept through the city as if winter had decided to arrive ahead of schedule. Room 214 remained quiet. No television, no conversation, only the sound of labored breathing and the faint rolling of hospital beds down the hallway. Dr. Evelyn stood at the door, holding a tray of medication, but today she didn't knock right away. She peered inside through the small rectangular window and saw Caleb still lying with his back to the room, his body curled inward, as if bracing against the visceral pain he had refused to treat. No morphine, no midazolam, no sedatives, just him, alone with the pain and time slowly running out. Evelyn exhaled quietly before opening the door. She knew she wasn't here just to check his blood pressure or measure his amylase levels. Something had shifted since the previous evening, in his eyes, in the way he kept silent, and inside her too. A strange pull, no longer the duty of a doctor, but something closer to a human debt. One person to another. "Good morning, Mr. Caleb," she said, her voice as soft as wind brushing against glass. "I brought digestive support and antibiotics. You still have a low-grade fever." "You here to try and change my mind again?" he asked without turning, his tone flat, as if unwilling to waste breath. "No, I just came to talk." Silence. Then, after a few seconds, he exhaled. "Then have a seat." Evelyn pulled a plastic chair closer to the bed, not too close. She wasn't wearing her white coat today, just a simple brown knit sweater, unassuming, without the barrier of professionalism. Today, she looked more like a friend, a listener, than a doctor. "Are you still writing?" she asked, not looking at him, but at his hand, the same hand that had once gripped the pillow so tightly, the one hiding that small notebook. "No, I've written dozens of times, then crossed them all out. A letter never arrives if the person doesn't want to receive it." "How do you know she doesn't want to receive it?" Evelyn asked gently. Caleb stayed silent for a long time. Then, for the first time that morning, he turned to face her. His eyes were red, sunken, exhausted, but not evasive. "I once sent a card, on her first birthday. There was no reply, nothing. I figured she had a new family, a father who loved her, everything I couldn't give. What am I in that world?" Evelyn gave a slight nod. Maybe a wound, maybe an unanswered question, but maybe something she's never had the chance to face. He asked suddenly, "What about you? Did you ever write to your father?" Evelyn froze. "I'm guessing no," Caleb said with a sad smile. "You've got the eyes of someone who burned every letter he ever wrote." "I did write," she said quietly. "Then I tore them up. My mother sent him a Christmas card every year. Me? I just remember once saying, 'If he ever comes back, I'll leave the house.' And I did." "Did he ever come back?" "No. And I never regretted it. But I also never forgave my mother for holding on to hope." They both fell silent. In that silence, you could hear the distant chirping of birds from the hospital courtyard, the fading footsteps of a nurse in the hallway, and the soft hum of the IV pump in the neighboring room. Evelyn looked up at the ceiling, her eyes growing just slightly blurred. "You know," Evelyn said softly, "I used to think that if I ever saw my father again, I'd ask him, 'How could you abandon your own daughter and feel nothing?'" Caleb clenched his hand. "Do you want to hear the honest answer? Yes. Because people are afraid, not of responsibility, but of coming back and realizing everyone's better off without them. Afraid that their presence would break, not heal. That fear, it's overwhelming." Evelyn bowed her head. A single tear fell quietly. "Maybe you should try one more time." Caleb didn't reply. He looked at her for a long moment, as if, for the first time, he was seeing the daughter he'd never met. Not his own flesh and blood, but a soul just like hers, abandoned, full of unanswered questions, and still trying to forgive something that could never be undone. He asked, "Do you believe that a letter can reach the right place, even if the sender's no longer here?" "I do," she said. "And I'll help you send it." He was silent. Then, with a faint effort, he turned over, reached beneath his pillow, and pulled out the old notebook. The cover was worn, the pages inside yellowed with age. He flipped to a blank page slowly. His hand trembled, and his eyes lingered on the old lines, the ones crossed out, misshapen, pained. "Would you like me to write it for you?" Evelyn asked. "No, I'll write it, but if I don't finish in time, tell her I tried." She nodded. Not a promise, just a nod, but one that carried weight. That morning, Caleb began to write. Each stroke of the pen felt like a blade carving into memory, into regret. Evelyn sat beside him, not interfering, just silent. She knew some letters don't need to be perfect. They just need to be sincere. When the letter filled 3 pages, he finally set the pen down. He exhaled, long and slow. "How do I send it?" he asked. "I'll help you find the address from the name and details you have. I'll send it myself." "Thank you, Doctor," he said quietly, "not for helping me, but for listening." Evelyn nodded, and for the first time she took his hand. His hand was rough, bony, but in that moment it was no longer the hand of a dying soldier. It was the hand of a father. 3 days after Caleb finished the letter, his condition deteriorated rapidly. His stomach could no longer digest anything. Even plain water sent waves of pain through his body. His portal vein continued to bleed slowly, leading to scattered internal blood loss that left his whole body pale. His blood pressure dropped steadily. His breaths became shorter, heavier. The hospital formally notified Evelyn that Caleb had entered the final stage, the moment of transition between dying and death. Evelyn wasn't surprised. She had seen this hundreds of times during night shifts, had grown used to watching monitors slow until they displayed nothing but a silent, flat line. But with Caleb, it was different. She couldn't walk into his room today as just a doctor. Today, she had to come as someone bringing the one thing he had been waiting for: hope. When Evelyn stepped into the room, the sky was slipping into dusk. Light from the window cast long shadows across the tiled floor, stretching over the thin blanket where Caleb lay. His eyes were closed, face tilted to one side, breath heavy through narrow nostrils. His body was gaunt, and the blue veins stood out clearly beneath the thin, pale skin. She approached quietly and placed her hand gently on his wrist. His pulse was weak, erratic. He opened his eyes just slightly. "You came back," he whispered, offering a faint smile. "You said you'd send the letter." Evelyn nodded, her voice steady, though her hand trembled just a little. "And your daughter received it. She read every word." Caleb's eyes widened. They were no longer clear, clouded now like misted glass, but a flicker of light broke through them, like the last sunlight shimmering across a lake. "Really?" "Yes. She asked me to tell you. She read it to the very last line. She knows you wrote it with everything you had left in your heart." Caleb looked up at the ceiling, as if trying to picture her face, the face he hadn't truly seen since she was a newborn. "Was she angry with me?" His voice cracked, each word drawn from his lungs like being pulled from the deep. "No," she said. "She was just sad she didn't know sooner. But she doesn't blame you. She said she hopes you'll go without pain, and that if you'd like, she'll keep your letter forever." A sound escaped Caleb, a laugh, or maybe a quiet sob, faint, broken. He raised his hand, trembling, as if reaching for something in the air. "I thought I would die, and no one would remember me. But she remembers me?" Evelyn leaned down and gently squeezed his hand. "Yes, you're not forgotten." Caleb was silent. His breathing grew steadier, but slower, much slower. She knew what that meant. His body was letting go, and his mind was beginning its journey away. "What's your name?" he asked after a pause. "Evelyn?" He smiled. "That's a beautiful name. If I could go back, I'd name my daughter Evelyn." Evelyn laughed softly, but a tear fell, landing on the back of his hand. He whispered, "Thank you for sitting here. I've never had anyone sit beside me like this." She nodded, unable to say anything. In that moment, she was no longer a medical resident, no longer a daughter filled with bitterness toward the father who had left. She was just a human being, holding on to another, one last time. Caleb looked at her. His eyes softened quietly, and then slowly closed. His breathing slowed, and then stopped. The heart monitor let out a long, single, unbroken tone. Evelyn leaned down, placed her hand over his chest. There was no heartbeat. She withdrew her hand, and with trembling fingers, gently closed his eyes. In the still room, only the fading light of dusk remained. Evelyn sat there for a long time, her hand still holding his, as if to say he had not left this world alone. On her way back to the on-call room, night had fully fallen. A cold draft swept in from the ventilated hallway, making her pull her shoulders in, though her eyes remained dry, until she stopped in front of the back stairwell of the building. There, in the dim shadows, she took out the copy of Caleb's letter, the one she had quietly photographed before mailing the original. Under the soft yellow light, she read through each line again. The handwriting was rough, full of crossouts, but it brimmed with effort. "I'm sorry I wasn't there the day you were born. Not because I didn't want to be, but because I didn't know how to face it. I've thought about you every day. Not a single day has passed without me imagining what your face might look like. If I could, I'd beg the Lord to have mercy on me and protect you always." Evelyn folded the letter and held it against her chest. She no longer knew whether the letter had truly arrived. Did the postal service get it right? Did the girl still live at that address? Did she even remember the name Caleb? But that no longer mattered, because in those final hours, Caleb was no longer alone. He had left this world with a belief that he had been forgiven. And sometimes, Evelyn thought, that's all a person really needs to leave this world in peace. 2 weeks had passed since Caleb's passing. The palliative care center continued operating like an old but tireless machine, receiving new patients each day, quietly bidding farewell to a few each night. Sometimes Evelyn thought of this place as a transfer station for souls, where people no longer fought to live, but simply searched for a way to leave, a little lighter. She still went to work every day, still checked vital signs, wrote prescriptions, adjusted sedatives, and spoke to patients' families with the neutral tone of a doctor. But deep down, something had changed. Since Caleb, every time she stepped into a patient's room, Evelyn no longer saw just the numbers. She looked closer into their eyes, trying to recognize the unspoken sorrow, the wounds that would never heal. That morning, she received a white envelope with no postal mark, addressed simply to Dr. Evelyn, Palliative Care Department. She opened it as soon as she returned to the on-call room. Inside was a small handwritten note, neat, careful, with the handwriting of a woman. "My name is Grace. Yesterday I received his letter. It took me hours before I dared to read it. Then it took me a few more hours to just sit there and do nothing. Today, I decided to write to you. I don't know if I should feel grateful or angry." I had imagined who he was, painted him as someone careless, heartless. But his words, they made me feel like I'd just been handed back a part of my memory I thought I'd lost. Evelyn paused, swallowed, then continued reading. "Thank you for being with him. Thank you for helping him find the courage to write. I'm in Texas. If you have time, I'd like to meet you. Not to ask about him, but to talk about something else, something I've never been able to understand. How do you forgive someone you've never met, but have missed your whole life?" Beneath the message was the address of a small cafe near Grant Park, along with a phone number. Evelyn set the letter down and leaned back in her chair. Inside her was a feeling both warm and startled, as if she had wandered too far into a story that didn't belong to her and was now being pulled back by an echo from the very silence she had once listened to. The cafe was small, with dark wood walls, warm golden lighting, and fogged-up windows from the morning chill. Evelyn arrived right on time. Grace was already there, a woman around 28, slender, dressed in a navy wool coat. Her black hair was neatly tied back, her face bare of makeup, but her eyes held a quiet maturity beyond her years. When Evelyn stepped inside, Grace stood up. "Dr. Evelyn?" "Yes." "Grace?" They shook hands, a gentle handshake, as if both were afraid of breaking something fragile they were holding inside. After a few awkward pleasantries, they quietly took their first sip of coffee. Evelyn noticed Grace wasn't wearing a ring. Her hand, resting on the slender white porcelain cup, bore a faint scar on the wrist, some trace of childhood or a turbulent coming of age. "You resemble him in a certain way," Evelyn began. Grace offered a faint, wistful smile. "I don't know if I want to resemble him, but I used to wonder how different my life would have been if he had stayed." "Did you ever wish to meet him?" Evelyn asked. Grace gave a small nod. "When I was 8, I snuck into my mother's room and looked through my birth records to find out his name. When I was 15, I wrote a letter but never sent it. By the time I turned 20, I stopped thinking about him. I told myself he chose to leave, so I choose to forget." She paused, eyes drifting toward the window, where fallen leaves scattered across the damp sidewalk. "But the scary thing is, I never could forget. No one ever taught me how to live with that kind of emptiness." Evelyn gripped her coffee cup tightly and took a deep breath. She said, "I don't have a father either. He left when I was 6. I hated him so much that I never read the Christmas cards my mom sent him every year. I told myself if he wanted to come back, he would have. But now I'm beginning to understand. Some people don't come back not because they don't want to, but because they don't know how. They think they no longer have the right." Grace looked at her for a long time, then gently nodded. Tears had gathered along her lashes. "I used to think that if I ever met him, I'd ask just one question. Why didn't you choose me? But then I read the letter, and for the first time I thought, maybe he did choose me. He just didn't know how to follow through with that choice." Evelyn reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, the original letter Caleb had written, which she had kept when she realized he wouldn't live much longer. She placed it on the table and slid it toward Grace. He wrote an ending to it. "I didn't send it in time." Grace took it, unfolded the paper. Her hands trembled. "I know I won't get another chance. But if you're reading this, I hope you understand that you were never abandoned. I just didn't have the courage to be your father. But you are still the most beautiful thing I ever had. Even if I don't deserve to say it, I love you. Caleb." Grace folded the letter, held it to her chest, and bowed her head low. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, as if trying to hold back the flood of tears. "You lied to him, didn't you?" she asked quietly. Evelyn was silent for a moment, then nodded. "I told him you read the letter and forgave him, so he could leave in peace. At the time, I didn't know if you'd ever respond, but I thought he needed to believe he hadn't been forgotten." Grace didn't respond right away. Then, after a long breath, she smiled, a soft smile, without anger, without blame. "Thank you. I think he was grateful for that. And so am I." They stayed for nearly another hour, not to talk more about Caleb, but about everything that remained: childhood, the sense of being unrooted, the way each of them had grown up without a figure to look up to. And somehow, in each other's stories, they began to see themselves, like two scattered pieces, once lost in the world, now fitting together through a simple moment of shared understanding. As they said goodbye, Grace held Evelyn's hand for a long time. "If you ever need someone to listen, I'll be there. Not because of him, but because I think we can help each other heal." Evelyn nodded, her eyes glistening. "We're both learning how to forgive. Not just others, but ourselves." That evening, Evelyn returned to the center and stood for a long time by the hallway window. Below, the leaves drifted sideways in the wind, and the golden lights from the floor below cast a glow on the glass dome like lonely stars. In her hand was the final letter. A soul had been sent off in peace. A daughter had begun the journey of forgiveness. And a doctor, once broken, was now learning how to believe in healing. And Evelyn understood. In life's final moments, what people need most is not to confront their failures, but to have someone kind enough to sit beside them, to listen, and to let them leave with peace in their hearts.